All to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. And Kristen, if you would lead us.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Now, just to remind everybody of the format for today, this is a public executive budget discussion by the Board of Selectmen. There will not be any public comment per our guidelines. This will be discussion of the fiscal year 2014-15 budget, including all town departments and the Board of Education and the Water Pollution Control Authority. And I think we're waiting for a little bit of backup from our finance department, which our budget director should be bringing down momentarily. This is one of two sessions the Board of Selectmen has. We're going to talk today as my colleagues would deem appropriate in terms of any items that are under consideration. The actual vote by this board will take place tomorrow afternoon. This is the end result, as most of you know, as I look at the faces that I've seen all throughout the months. This was kind of kicked off on March 4th with the initial recommendation of the first Selectmen's budget. What will be coming out of here is the recommendations from the Board of Selectmen to the Board of Finance. The Board of Finance will review those over the next couple of days. Their session and their vote is scheduled for Thursday evening. From that point, it then gets handed to the RTM. The RTM has a series of committee sessions planned for, I think it's, Tom, and I may ask your help here, it's Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday night of next week, the 7th, 8th, and 9th. They will have at the regularly scheduled RTM meeting in late April, they will have further discussion, and it is their custom to identify any adjustments they wish to make during that time. And just to be clear, the Board of Selectmen has the ability to adjust items up or down. The Board of Finance has the ability to adjust items up or down. They can add to the budget and subtract from the budget. This is important especially when you're transferring an item from one line to another. You need to reduce one and increase the other. Once it goes to the RTM only has the ability to reduce line items in the budget. All right. They'll identify their items at their April meeting, and then on the first Monday in May, they are scheduled to vote on the budget. Occasionally in years it takes more than one night for them to resolve that, but the schedule says it will take place the first Monday in May. The first Tuesday in May, the Board of Finance then meets to set the mill rate. And they'll take into account the most current updates on the collection rate, the grand list, and certain other factors to set that mill rate. Anything I left out?
No, I think you covered it.
Really trying to buy some time here while Linda's getting the schedules down to us.
Well, while we have a minute,
Go right ahead.
thank you, Mr. Tetreault. I just wanted to thank Mr. Tetreault and his administration for all the work on the budget, and thanks to Selectman McCarthy Vahey for her work on this board as well during this budget process. I mean, everyone has worked long and hard for the better part of a month through all the meetings, and the town finance department, the Board of Education, the school administration, the finance department within the Board of Education, and people all along the way have done a great job at presenting us information about their departments, their requests, and following up with answers to the many questions that we have raised. So I want to thank everyone for that. Also, special thanks to the Board of Finance. The Board of Finance, as is their custom, has welcomed us to join them for these meetings for the past month, and they've done a phenomenal job at keeping the meetings organized and focused and on the issues, not on anything besides, issues and facts as far as, the deliberations and conversations went. So my hat's off to Chairman Flynn and the work they've done along the way to get us to the point where we are today. And finally, a thanks to all the citizens. At last count, and I had to stop counting because my inbox got pretty full, I was nearing 1,400 emails. So it's wonderful to get input from 1,400 email accounts, which probably represents well over 2,000 citizens, and they're still coming in today and tomorrow, and I haven't even seen those yet. So it's great input. We value it. We read every email. It's impossible to reply to 2,000 emails or 1,500 of them, so I want to say thank you to all the concerned citizens for their input and for reaching out to us with their opinions and information and questions, and know that you're heard, even though at least personally, I was unable to return each and every email. Life just doesn't allow that to happen, but thanks to all of them.
Kevin, thank you. And I trust your arm injury isn't because you were trying to return them all.
No, it hasn't helped, I will say that.
Do you have any thoughts to add?
I'll concur with Selectman Kiley, and thanks to you also. It's definitely been a full process, as you all know, so many of you who have been there with us during the hearings, and to the point of the public input and comment, with the emails and with the session on Saturday, the Board of Finance's session, I felt very proud to be a Fairfielder that day, to have so many people present and talking about their concerns, engaged, involved, caring to speak up about the issues that you're passionate about the issues that make us who we are as a town. And the dialogue was very respectful and productive, and it was just very impressive. Likewise with the emails, though. I was watching one of the tapes last night, the Board of Finance session that I missed last Thursday, and I think it was Chairman Flynn said that sometimes there's a little too much passion, and every once in a while people get a little carried away with their passion, and I think it comes out of, as he said, a passion and caring. What I have really appreciated from the emails and the responses that we heard at the podium on Saturday was the thoughtfulness, and particularly impressed with those folks who really have come forward with specific thoughts and ideas about what we can do to make our town and our government even better. So we are listening, and yes, like Selectman Kiley said, I have had a few late nights lately to really read through the emails and hear what people are saying, and yes, it's became impossible to reply to everyone, but you are heard, and I've heard the same sentiment from other elected officials, so I appreciate you bringing that up.
Thank you.
No question. And I think it was great to see everybody show up Saturday morning and literally fill up the auditorium. There's nothing better for our town and our government process than having that many citizens engaged in the process and giving us feedback. Ms. Gardner has arrived.
I am sorry for the lateness.
No problem.
Always working.
Thank you.
There we go.
Thank you.
There we go.
Can I get one more of those for?
Yep.
Thank you.
Now, what Ms. Gardner has provided us is a list of those items that came up for discussion during the Board of Finance, Board of Selectmen joint hearings. And this is, we are allowed to make adjustments anywhere in the budget. This, in essence, has been prepared to kind of help focus our discussion for this afternoon. So I will, if it's okay, my suggestion for today's discussion is we start with going through these items since they were brought up during our discussion.
Sure.
That doesn't limit us from going anywhere else in the budget we'd like to, but I think it provides a framework for some way of making sure that we get to the key issues that have been brought up. And then Ms. Gardner's here with any questions, or to answer any questions that we have as follow-up. But to start, we're going to look at a couple of revenue items. And there's one under state grants. This came up during our emergency management discussion. Deputy Chief Art Reed mentioned there was a grant that we always get, and we were looking back as to what that might be on a basis. It turns out we don't always get it. In fact, for the last 3 years, we haven't gotten it. However, it was discussed, we'll bring it up here, it was hard to put a number in on that since we weren't able to find a 3-year average or some other prescription for why we would get that.
Okay.
Also came up on the revenue side during the joint hearings was the library fines. Those have been increased at our library. Thank you to Ms. Ronald and the library team. They went back and looked at that and said that might be an additional $8,500 worth of revenue. So that is a potential adjustment that we can consider making. And what I'm thinking is that maybe we should go through these kind of one at a time.
Sure.
If there's questions or discussion item at the time, let's have that when we cover that line item to make sure we don't move on without getting that either identified or identifying any additional information that we would like by tomorrow. So next up, in the first selectman's office, there was actually an adjustment that we can make in the salary of the chief of staff. The actual salary that the chief of staff is hired at is less than what was in the budget book. And that's in part because, as Ms. Gardner informed me, some of the budget book salary ranges are put in off a munis based on back in September, October, and they didn't have the adjustment item for the actual salary, but that's potentially a $4,000, $3,940 decrease to the budget. Next item up, and this is a biggie, is the health insurance renewal. Because the town has been achieving good experience in this regard, there is potentially $250,000 that we can reduce the budget by. And that's based on the latest Aon information that is through the end of February. And if, for those of you that have followed the budget multiple years, you know that we get updates on health insurance at the end of every month. We try and capture the latest available information, the best available information that we have to make adjustments going forward. Also, one of the items discussed at the at the joint hearings was the potential cut to the new part-time staff accountant in the Board of Finance. If that was done, that would be a savings of $35,500. Moving on, the next item up is an IT phone engineer that is currently in the budget. That's a full-time position for half a year, so that would be starting January 1st. And that position, plus the associated payroll lines, Social Security, health insurance, etc., is in the budget for $47,613. The reason it's listed here is there was some discussion as to whether that would be adjusted downward, and that person would not be hired on that time period. Next item up is a water rate adjustment. For those of you following the Aquarian News, you remember a year ago there was a big discussion about how high that rate increase was going to be. There were a number of public hearings that was able to be reduced considerably in terms of what was put into the rates that we have. It turns out, and this was mentioned last spring also, that there were some tax benefits that Aquarian was receiving that they hadn't fully comprehended in their request for a rate increase. What we're seeing here is in our water rate adjustment, a $40,000 reduction in expenses due to Aquarian passing on the benefit they received from the taxing authority, and I believe that was the federal taxes in that case. Moving on to the health department. There were several new part-time positions added to the budget or included in the budget this year to address unfunded mandates and requirements on our health department, specifically providing health services, and nurses to the Board of Ed, to our schools. And Sands, just get you here, I want to clarify, that's both our public schools and the private schools that are included in that, or is that just the public schools?
These positions are just the public schools.
Okay, these will address just the public schools, just to clarify that. But if they were not added, that would be a reduction of $59,121. But at the moment, they are included in the budget that we've discussed. Let's see. Also, in terms of reduction, we have the ability, there was what's called a bond premium. When we go out to the market, one of the things that happens is the way that the bids come back. There's what's called a bond premium. The last time we went out, that was $3 million that can be used as a reduction to interest rates, as a reduction to debt service, if you will. The plan was to spread that out over 3 years. We used part of it 2 years ago, $1 million of it, or $1 million of it this year, $1 million was planned in the current budget, and $1 million for the budget after that. Those would be reflected in a reduction in debt service of $1 million in each of those 3 years. Because there is a $1 million in reserve for not the budget we're deciding now, but next year's budget, or the fiscal 2016 budget, it is legal, and we have the ability or the authority to use part of that $1 million in the fiscal 15 budget if we choose. That was discussed at the Board of Finance Board of Selectmen joint sessions, and it's certainly something this board can discuss and make a recommendation concerning.
Okay. While we're on that particular topic, could we just talk, and I think Mr. Mayor is here, I just want to make sure that everyone is crystal clear on this particular matter. It was $3 million over 3 years. We've used one. We're already anticipating one in the budget we're considering, and there's a potential one for year 3, which will be next year.
And just to term the years right, fiscal 14 is using 1/3 of that.
Yep.
Fiscal 15 budget has included in the budget that is before us using a second third of that, or approximately $1 billion. And fiscal 16, which we have not seen yet,
Right.
but the plan would be in, right now, is to use $1 million of that in fiscal 16, so those would be spread out over that 3-year period.
Right.
Did you want to confirm that with
Is that,
Mr. Mayor?
is that correct, Bob?
That's correct.
That's what I thought. So,
And just in case anybody didn't pick that up on the mic, Mr. Mayor, confirm that, but go ahead.
no, thank you. So just so everyone understands the situation, if we were to consider taking some of that premium that was planned for next year and pull it into this year for any purpose, that would have a negative impact on next year's budget to that degree within the debt service for that particular year's budget.
Correct.
It would increase debt service by that amount in the subsequent year. Okay.
Correct. So it, simple form, if we use it this year, it may help us keep taxes at a level or reduce taxes or expenses this year. It would have a comparable impact of increasing potential expenses or increasing the tax rate to that same amount next year. And as obviously as pointed out, it would either require an increase in the tax rate or a comparable reduction in expenses some other place within the budget to make up for that.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting concept, and I thank the Board of Finance. I think it was Chairman Flynn who brought the topic up during the Board of Finance hearings. You know, we do find ourselves this year in a particularly difficult situation with the health insurance on the Board of Education side, in addition to having a very tight budget, as we always have, right? So whether we consider it or whether we enact it or not, it's nice to know that we at least have, creatively looked at options to, fix this year's budget without damaging too much of the future or without pulling too much money in from the future. So it's a worthy concept for us to consider.
Any
Agreed.
thoughts?
No, agreed, and I appreciate the work that was done by the finance department to allow us to be able to have that and to have the refinancing that was done, so all the way around agreed.
Okay.
So what we
Thanks.
just, gone through a number of items that are potential decreases to the budget, if you will. We've kind of talked through some of the good news. Let's address some of the items that may require increases to the budget. In some cases, these are included in the budget. In some cases, they're not. And we'll try and identify that as we go through. First item up is under IT, and it's about Fair TV. As those of you that follow the joint services heard, the Cable Advisory Council currently has a suit with Soundview Services. The money that flows to the town flows from Cablevision or AT&T, but I think Cablevision at this point, to Soundview. $100,000 of that goes to the Cable Advisory Council. They parcel that out to 4 different communities: Milford, Woodbridge, Orange, and Fairfield. They have parceled out in about equal portions for the last few years. We have used that to fund the Fair TV operation in our town. Because of the pending lawsuit and the legal defense required, the CAC, Cable Advisory Commission, has gone to PURA, the Public Utilities Regulatory Authority, and gotten permission to use that money for legal fees. That helps CAC out in their lawsuit, or defending their lawsuit with Soundview. However, if they use the money for legal fees or reserve them for legal fees, that's $25,000 that is not flowing through the town to fund our Fair TV operation. Because Fair TV is really become one of the fabrics of our community, in a way many people who can't attend these meetings get to hear what's going on, or get to follow up after to remember what was said or hear it again. There is consideration given that we in fact add that technically $24,450 to our budget to make sure that Fair TV is funded continuously throughout the next year. Anything to add to that?
Just a quick question on that one. Is there an alternative way to potentially fund Fair TV into the next budget year without going through a formal budget process? Because I'm still a little concerned that we haven't ironed out all the details of, the Fair TV relationship with town, the ordinance language that is, still to be considered and acted upon. And I'm just not sure exactly where that's all going to end up. So obviously, without putting any, crimp in what they're trying to do from a coverage perspective, or slowing down their operations, that's not my intent at all. I'm just trying to understand the total picture when it comes to Fair TV, where we are today and where we're going to be from a funding perspective and from a budget perspective and from an RTM approved, legislative perspective. So I just don't know what's out there.
Different question. I'll just generally make a comment. I'm listening right now, and I think we may need to come back to some of these. I expect
Yeah.
that we will, but just since this is the first time going through
Sure.
this, I'm more in listening mode, and I am interested in further conversation on that too. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
Kylie.
I should point out that the reason this is here before us now as a potential increase, was not included in the original version of the budget, is because this was late-breaking news when this got confirmed, roughly the second week in March. I forget the exact date, but it was just before the IT presentation on this component. So we were able to have actually we were able to have the chair of the Fair TV Commission come before us and explain the dynamics of what's taken place. But I think it was a March 17th letter that we received, thereabouts, from the CAC defining this is what their preference would be.
Okay, thanks.
All right, next up is our school security recommendation. This came through and came out of the planning work that our police chief, fire marshal, and superintendent of schools did. This initially was not ready in time for the budget, as when the budget books were going to print. School security is that important that I wanted to give them plenty of time to work through this, so I announced in early January, as we started our series of school public sessions on security, that we would have a recommendation on security for this year and a separate funding proposal. That came through as part of our police department presentation. And we have, that came through at $256,000. And to implement that would require that addition to the budget. Or, and please forgive me, or comparable cuts or adjustment elsewhere to make up for that. So as I talk about these as additions to the budget, they would be. It doesn't mean that they can't be funded by adjustments elsewhere in the budget. Next item up is an electricity adjustment. We had planned for some adjustments in the second half of the year and a new power purchase agreement being in place. Those negotiations fell apart at the last minute, so there is a $31,000 addition to the budget that we need to make that covers electric costs for streetlights and public works in the second half of the year. Next item up, Senior Center Director. There are a number of options, but the one that was discussed or brought up for discussion during the joint sessions was the possibility of hiring a full-time position for half a year. And again, in these, it doesn't mean to say that's the only option being considered or the only option that can be voted on. In order to kind of put it on our checklist here of things to cover, we used the guideline of Ms. Gardner, jotted it down if it was something that was discussed or mentioned during the joint sessions. And that would be a $47,600 adjustment for half a budget year, and obviously if that were added, it would be anticipated that would continue in to the following budget year at approximately twice that number, because it would then be in for 12 months, not just 6 months. And then moving on to WPCA. Now the next items are not part of our tax rate. They're not part of what we call the general fund expenditures. They're part of the WPCA expenditures and are covered by the WPCA fee that people pay if they're on our sewer system. And within that, again, because the employees there are on our insurance system, because of Aon's updated numbers at the end of February, there would be a reduction there. Because they use a lot of electricity, and we just discussed the increase in electricity because of the power purchase agreement in the second half of the year, there would be a significant increase to the budget. And just to be exact, the health insurance would reduce their request by $11,000. Electricity would increase their request by $24,000 and change. Fees and professional services, there is an accounting adjustment moving the software costs from fees and professional services to another line within the budget. It nets out to zero. It's a reduction of 2,001, an addition of 2,000 in another. So there's no. So that means that the net increase to WPCA's, and again, this would be handled in the sewer fees, would be $13,519. Now, there are two other items that I want to point out that were not addressed in here because they were not discussed at the joint sessions in terms of specifics. One is the revaluation program or the property appraisal program for our tax assessor's office. There had been a number estimated of approximately $750,000 or $758,000 over 2 years. So half of that was included in the fiscal 15 budget. We have gone out to bid on that. We have gotten responses back. We've been in the process of evaluating those responses. And it looks like and we've also, we're still in the process of evaluating that. And but it appears that the most reasonable cost that we need to account for is approximately $850,000 over 2 years. So that would be, would mean an increase in the cost of that component of $15,000 for fiscal 15.
15 or 50, did you say?
$50,000
50K.
as a potential increase in the expenses for fiscal year 15.
Okay.
And then second, based on the results coming out of our Board of Assessment Appeals, and the Board of Assessment Appeals meets with taxpayers, reviews their request for reduction in taxes, and it looks like the numbers coming out of that, if in fact they grant those requests or some part of those requests, that becomes a reduction in the revenue, specifically the tax revenue that's planned to come in. For that reduction in revenue, either taxes go up or expenses have to be reduced. And there are a number of components of that revenue line, but just to let everybody know, that is approximately $230,000. Now, typically, that's something that's taken into account when the Board of Finance sets the mill rate, because they'll look at collection rates, net grand list, and some other components as part of that. But I wanted to make sure that everybody's aware of that as we go through and look at this. That's in essence a reduction in our grand list, a reduction in the tax revenue that we planned on, and should be at least considered in the back of everybody's mind as we go through and look at this. I think that's everything on the table. Just to summarize, it looks like we've got about $850 or $8,500 more in revenue. When we look at potential expenditure decreases, and this without regard as to whether that would have the support of this board or any other board, but just as items discussed, there's approximately $436,000 worth of reductions. Then when we looked at expenditures, there was approximately $359,000, just under $360,000 worth of potential additions, again, without regard to whether they'd actually be voted into the budget. That's a net general fund adjustment of approximately $85,441. And Linda, just to correct me if I read that, that's a reduction of $85,000
Yes.
net? Okay, so that means if each one of these was approved, it would actually reduce the budget by $85,000. That does not count the $13,000 increase to WPCA, which doesn't impact the general fund and it does not impact the tax rate.
And nor does it consider the long-term, the bond premium,
Correct.
any potential use of
Right.
those funds.
Oop.
Yep.
Okay.
Sorry. Yep, I'm good, thanks.
Correct. That the premium, bond premium, is not included in any of these numbers yet, nor is any increase in the internal service fund or results of the internal service fund based on the Board of Ed experience for this year. So those two items are outside of this discussion. This focus just on the specific expenses that were brought up during the joint sessions. But certainly those are both key discussion points as we go forward.
Absolutely. Just a quick question on the schedule. I think, Linda, just so I'm clear on the schedule, on page 2, well, on page 3, the top of page 3, the net of the expense adjustments is the 76, and then you're adding to that the pickup on revenue to get you to the 85? Is that how it works? Okay, thanks. I got it.
Just a procedural question.
Sure.
So I recognize and I want to thank Mrs. Gardner for getting this to us and literally hot off the presses. I also just want to recognize that I don't think that members of the public have access to this since it literally is so hot off the presses. So I don't know if there are a few extra copies here, and I assume that it will go up on the website later today, as has been the custom with the finance department.
Yep.
Is that, am I right about that?
Yeah, Linda, if you can make that happen. And we do have a couple handouts up here. There's some extra ones there if anybody wanted to pick up one to help with their own internal discussions. I think that, at first blush, there's both, I think, two things here. One, there's certainly some again, difficult choices we all have to make, and certainly this board is now in the position of making those choices and making a recommendation tomorrow as to what we want. There seems to be some options here to both add to and reduce, but on balance, we have the ability to keep our projected tax increase near where it is. We also have the ability to go back to any other department in the budget and make other adjustments as we see fit. We are not limited to the ones on this sheet. These are just the ones that came up during the joint sessions. Any further comments or discussion at this point?
I would love to just start kind of going down the list. And thank you for taking us through that. And again, thanks to Mrs. Gardner. The first two items on the expenditure decreases side are I would assume, adjustments that we would take. They're positive numbers for us. The third one, the finance accountant, the staff accountant, I'd like to talk a little bit about that, because as I was going back through the paperwork that we were given about that position and remembering the discussion on that, it seems that the focus of the conversation was more with respect, and this is to probably to Mr. Mayor, the focus of the discussion that night, as I recall, was more about...
Are you going to ask
I
Mr. Mayor a
would-
question?
Yes, I would like to ask a
If you
question.
could join us up here at the podiums.
So the sheet that was handed out, kind of the top of that talked about the grant accounting, but one thing we didn't,
Do you want to clarify where you got
the
that sheet
sheet
from?
is from the budget hearing and the finance department presented, and that is available on the website, and I believe was distributed out that night. I think it was from our meeting on the 20th, I believe it was. So one of the bullets kind of down below was 5-year financial planning. And we didn't really talk about that much that night. And I wondered if you could just talk a little bit more about how that, if the new accountant would help with that planning, because I know that was discussed on Thursday, in terms of the importance of that kind of strategic planning, and I could concur completely. I think it was Chairman Flynn who actually talked about it. So I just wondered if you could talk a little bit more about it, since we didn't get a chance to at the budget hearings.
Right, yeah, actually, the budget hearings, the conversation turned more into talking about the documentation rather than the position. The document was put together by Ms. Gardner, Ms. Nolfi, and Ms. Bossi, as in their perception of what's going on in the department, tied into what the auditors have talked about in any grant account, that the town does not adequately respond to taking care of its grant accounting responsibilities from that perspective. The idea of the original request of one person, one full-time equivalent, was to be able to take care of the grant accounting, plus be able to perform other activities that the department does not have the time resource to accomplish at this time. A big one there that everybody asks for is a 5-year financial plan. With a full-time equivalent, we could do all those things, plus relieve some of the pressure during the budget period. For a half-time person, we could relieve some of the budget stress during the budget period. We could accomplish the development of a 5-year financial plan. We could, continue our work with respect to union contract evaluations, the other items on that list. So, summarizing, to do it all, we need a full-time person. To do all but the grant accounting, we need approximately a half-time person.
So there isn't a full-time person in the budget. Obviously, it's the part-time
That was my original
position.
request.
Right, your original request. So
Right.
if you were to get the part-time person, then would that person be used first for the grant accounting piece that was asked for, or first for?
No, the grant accounting would not be something that I'm certain we'd be able to address it at all with a half-time person. It'd be primarily being able to fulfill those other tasks, 5-year plans, relief with respect to the budget activities. There's a lot of people, a lot of hours, a lot of comp time that's worked during that period. There'd be some relief there. It would be more like, it wouldn't be one person, it'd be more project-oriented. It'd be like we bring someone in, we need to do, okay, you want a 5-year plan? We'd bring someone in that would work with me so we could, because we don't have the resources in the department right now to do that work, along with everything else that's going on in the department. So if we want to do a 5-year plan, we'd bring a person in to do a 5-year plan. So that would be some of the hours. So it wouldn't really be a one half-time person. It'd be more like seasonal employment, or more like part-time employment. So you'd bring a project person in to work on that specific project. During the budget period, we'd bring someone in to work on the budget, so we can get some of the budget material out sooner, quicker, earlier, faster, and not have all the extra hours and late nights.
If I might, just to clarify, what you're talking about is matching the skill set up to the work. And if you can't find all that in one person, you just bring in different people as you need them for the different skill.
Correct. And it'd be different skill set, different cost amounts as well. Like someone might come in at a $15 an hour, someone else might come in at a $20 an hour, depending upon the project.
So, given where the request stands right now, it would not then be your intent to hire one person. That's what I'm hearing you say, which is what I thought, actually, from the presentation. So it would be literally to try and find the people you need to get the work done that needs to be done.
Correct. We're not doing everything. We're doing a lot, as that document points out, that was not accomplished in the past. But the department is operating at full capacity, except plus.
Okay. Thank you. That's definitely a different picture than what I left with the night that we had the hearing, so I appreciate the clarification. And I know it's not the most appealing position or hours necessarily to add in some respects, especially, given all the different strains on the budget, but it really seems important especially when I think across the board you have people agreeing how we do need that 5-year outlook so that we can be more strategic going forward. And don't necessarily find ourselves in the position that we're in each year with some of our budgets. So,
And again, just to clarify, that position or the dollars for that part-time position are currently in the budget, so.
Just
Any
a quick,
thoughts?
quick follow-up on that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just so I'm clear, I'm not sure I followed all of that. The work, the fund accounting work that ideally you would like to get done does not get accomplished with only a part-time person. You would need a full-time person to have the bandwidth to do the things you need, that person needs to do in addition to that? Is that what I heard?
If I understand you correctly, yes.
Okay.
I think to do the, to completely put in a grant accounting process and the systems and the tracking and all that, plus do the other activities, I think requires a full-time person.
Okay.
And in my sense of priorities as CFO, if I only had, 1,000 hours or 750 hours or
Right.
or some number of hours, the grant accounting would not be my first priority because I don't think it's the town's first priority. I think the town's first priority is a 5-year plan, for example.
Right, which brings me to my next question. The 5-year planning work that you're talking about, that's relatively higher level work than I would anticipate either of these two people being capable of doing. So who would actually be doing that work?
I would hire someone at that, again, this would be, the dollars would be used on a project-by-project basis.
Okay.
So, when, for example, the last 5-year plan the town did, myself and a guy named Ed Gleason chaired a committee. I think Mr. Tetchell actually served on that committee. So I have a little bit of history in this town with that, and I certainly have history with futuristic planning, in my corporate work history. But what I would do is I would engage someone at the skill set level that could work with me to do that under my direction. That would, yes, be a different skill set level than someone who would monitor and track grant funding.
Okay, so I'm pretty clear on those two things now. So my next question is, what other work in the department isn't getting done today or is getting shifted around amongst your employees because of any general overflow, pressure on the department?
I don't have a copy of that document in front of me, but the one thing that's off the top of my head is the department is not doing as much internal auditing.
That's where I was going, yeah. So,
I'm with you.
so how much internal audit is not getting done today that should be, in your opinion?
That's something I have to give some significant thought to. I mean,
Okay.
we haven't totally eliminated internal auditing. We're doing it.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting.
But basically, what we're doing is we're identifying areas where we think we need it, whereas in the past, there was a continual flow of just internal audits on a sequential pattern basis. Whereas now we're saying, oh, there's a problem, like we did, recently we identified some issues in looking at some activity going on the pension, with the pension. So we audited the pension plan of the town and fire, and we found some discrepancies. We created some new forms and new policies and procedures that improve that process.
All right. So your holistic approach to audit is a little bit down these days because that person's doing other stuff, is what I'm kind of hearing, based on what that document
Correct.
reads as well. So part of this would relieve the person who should be doing more auditing but might be doing bank reconciliations or whatever else they might be doing to get them back into a more proactive, holistic audit position.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I'd also point out that the financial plan that was put together, Mr. Mayor chaired, I served on the commission, was much more extensive than anything was done in the interim. There have been some additional 5-year plans that the town has put together, but have been pretty basic, kind of 1-year plans as opposed to a much more extensive modeling that was done back in the 2001, 2002 timeframe. So I think that this is a chance for a significant upgrade in terms of what that does and provide us with another tool going forward. We've done significant upgrades, thanks to Mr. Mayor and his department, in the capital planning area, both in terms of making the waterfall chart and our capital plan integrated, both for the town and Board of Ed, and shortly for the WPCA, and including all of those into the same program. But we have a good view going out. We can now then take that and integrate it into the financial plan. That was something that was included back in 2001, 2002, but that type of integration hasn't been included in the more recent high-level interviews and planning documents, rather. And I think we need something to the level that Mr. Mayor's talking about to address the concerns going forward, especially in this economy. If you go back to the early 2000s, there was a lot more optimistic view of what's taken place. We certainly now have pension costs included, retiree medical costs included. We're taking our commitment to increase our surplus more than we have. So there are many more factors going into that, so I think a more comprehensive look is very definitely needed, and the labor to help with that is very definitely needed.
Yeah, and actually, you mentioned WPCA. I mean, I'm not sure what the timeline on that is, because I'm not attending any of those commission meetings, but if that's something that's going to be on our agenda quickly, there's significant resource required. That's a fairly complex, long-term capital financial planning effort.
Go ahead.
May I follow up, Selectman Kiley, your questions and comments? I had concern when we heard that at the Board of Finance,
Right.
Board of Selectmen joint hearings, the internal auditing piece, but I'm not clear, as I listened to you and to the conversation just now, this position will give relief to the internal auditor? Because if I'm hearing, if you're project-based and that person is, really dealing with some of the projects, are they really going to be able to provide relief?
It all depends on how much resource, if any, that you allocate to the department. If you allocate resource that I've been able to get back to doing more internal auditing, then we do more internal auditing. If you don't allocate resources, then we don't do more internal auditing. So it's all tied to the resource allocation.
Okay. I do, since you raised the WPCA point, I think that conversation is to be determined. I was here at the last meeting as a member, and I think there are some conversations that still need to take place, so it's unclear, what the exact timeline is and what the role is, and I certainly expect that Mr. Michelangelo and you will be putting your heads together pretty soon.
We've already started doing some pro forma stuff, but nothing specific.
Oh, okay.
Any further comments either on this point or other points in the discussion? in the
Again,
document?
just to thank you, because this is a different sense of things that I understood before, and I appreciate the clarification. It's
Thank you for your
helpful.
interest. Appreciate you thinking about it.
Any other comments on items contained in this document or the budget book?
You want off?
Yeah.
Any,
Yeah, I have a few.
go right ahead.
Okay.
I do as well.
I didn't want to jump around too much, but I did want to quickly touch, let me see which one I'll go to first. I'm not going to bother with the no-brainers like the small reductions, the insurance matters, finance we've touched. The IT phone engineer, could we just have a quick discussion around that? Because unfortunately, that was an evening I was unable to attend, and I wasn't able to hear the presentation from the IT director, and I apologize for that. But I just wanted to kind of maybe hear some thoughts back from my colleagues on the board as to, was this discussion mainly focused within the Board of Finance? Was it a 12-person discussion? I'm not putting you on the spot, I'm just trying to get some feel for the thought process.
Yeah, let's do two things. Let me frame that a bit.
Yeah, please.
For our discussion, and then if need be, we certainly can invite Mr. Leslie to join us. I don't see him here today, but we can certainly invite him
Okay.
tomorrow if there's follow-on questions.
And-
I'd only ask you to let me know
And that's fine,
if you'd like him here for that.
okay.
But basically, we are looking at a new phone system for the town and for the Board of Ed. There was some extensive conversation about the need for that, and I think that seemed to be something that everybody identified the need for without committing to the timing.
Right.
All right? There was
Right.
certainly some of the question about this year, next year, how does that flow? So I don't mean to overstate that commitment by anybody. If we were doing this year, the point was made that bringing in somebody who can both help with the implementation and be there to pick up some of the technical work on the network side, because phone system we bring in would be very network-based and dependent. That's why this position was requested for roughly half a year, allowing for both the approval of the project, because the project itself has not been approved. That would be a proposal coming through
Right.
in the months ahead.
Understood.
All right. Kristen, did I leave anything out?
No, I think if Kevin or Selectman Kiley, if what you're asking is, is that something that we had a lot of conversation
Right.
about in terms of cutting that position? I mean, I'm not surprised to see it here on one hand, not that I remember every bit of everything that was said, but I am on the other. But I guess, part of my question, I would love to have some conversation with Mr. Leslie, actually.
I think that's a
Given
great
this,
point.
just because, as I wrote that, what are the alternatives here?
Right.
If I could ask Ms. Gardner to make a point on that and ask Mr. Leslie to show up for
All right.
our Board of Selectmen meeting tomorrow.
Right. Just,
But just may I follow up just one more
Please.
thing in terms of that conversation? I do remember there were some concerns raised and questions, and, I shared in those. I didn't necessarily speak to them at that meeting, but, I think it would be helpful to continue the conversation tomorrow with him here, because.
That's why we just requested it.
Absolutely.
I think that's fair. I can leave it there for now. That's fine. The next question I had was on the school security project, the $256,000. And I'm glad that we had this conversation. I think it's critically important, from my personal perspective, that we find a way to support this. Some of it's offset by savings that as has been noted in our presentation and in the book and the presentation that Chief McNamara gave us. It's just a critically important issue for our schools and for the safety of the kids in our schools. So I really just wanted to throw that out there, and maybe we don't need to have an in-depth discussion on it, but it is a big number, and it is a difficult budget year, but it's one of those things that, as it's been presented to me from going to the forums that you folks put together, and from speaking to every expert I could possibly speak to on the education side and the law enforcement side, it's just, is it the perfect plan? No, but I don't think there is a perfect plan. Every town does it differently. Some towns are doing nothing, some towns are doing, way more than this, and a lot of towns are doing hybrids. But it's one of those investments in both schools and in safety and security that I just think needs to be made. And I have a lot of faith in the gentleman that put this together, compromising along the way, from where they first started a year ago, and reconfiguring it and moving this person from here to there and finding a few other dollars there and putting the training in. It just seems to be, without being an expert in school safety and security, it just seems to me like they've come up with a good middle-of-the-road hybrid plan that should work, and I hoped to have support for this throughout the town.
Well, I would say I'm definitely supportive, and sadly, it is a critical need. And I wish it wasn't. And I wish that we could take that $256,000 and put it right into the classroom with the kids.
Right.
I do, but I recognize that it is critical, and I think that you're right, that it was a good compromise. And I very much appreciate the thought that was given and the time spent to look at the different alternatives.
Right.
It is a big number, and it's a commitment that's ongoing. It's, unlike some of those capital expenses that we're looking at, much of this is an ongoing expense. But one thing that I found very heartening in the presentation was the kind of communication that I was hearing about between the police department and the schools, and how that has actually had a positive impact. And that, to me, is really critical. And I know from working with some of our school district personnel what that means. And I know,
Yeah.
you know, firsthand from doing some of our, even our suicide prevention training, the ability for our police officers to talk directly with our law enforcement is critical, and this allows for that. So I am supportive of this, and again, sadly recognize that it's a reality that we face, so.
Yep. I think there's to weigh in also. To me, this is one of those things that we have to do. That we may discuss how we fund it, but in terms of an initiative, this is something that has to take place.
Yeah.
The only thing I'd qualify in what was said is that I don't see this as a compromise. This is step one. This is not the end of the initiative. All right? So please realize that this is step one. This moves us down the road. We get to learn more. We get to see what other towns and school districts are doing. We also get to see what is recommended from the state as part of their ongoing discussions, and we get to see what funding is available as we move through this. So I think this is, you know, a very important and necessary first step. I think we have to find a way to include this in the budget. And again, I will compliment Chief McNamara, Superintendent Dave Title, Fire Marshal Bill Kessler, in terms of working together to put together the right foundation, right first step that we can build on as we move forward. I would also caution everybody that at some point when we have gotten the school security underway, we need to take a look at the town facilities, town events, that the world's different. We can talk about school issues, but there also was a Boston Marathon incident. There are other events beyond this that we need to take a look at. When our school children finish with a school day, many of them show up at the library. It's just a different building with the same people inside. There's a lot that we need to look at, and both in terms of Fairfield standpoint, but as a larger community, we need to look at what we do, how we keep our people safe, and we have that commitment for safety and security. As Chief McNamara pointed out, and I'm sure would be echoed by our fire department and our other public safety officials, this is something we're talking about now as a community. This has never been something that police and fire were not focused on. It is a more public discussion now, but it's something our public safety officials have been focused on for years. This is part of their job. They live with this every day. I'd say the only people that have joined this recently is the public. And so it's starting to be something that's very visible on our radar. So, go ahead.
Just follow up, you know, when I use the word compromise, just to clarify, I think that when we face the events of the past year plus in Newtown, you know, we had a lot of different reactions and responses, and that we had different ideas and thoughts from parents and members of the public, and that's what I mean when I say compromise. That I think that it is a reasonable approach, and in that sense, and also the coming together piece is, I think, what's so impressive, which is what you spoke of.
Yeah, I think this is, you know, the recommendations from the people in our town that work in public safety. It's a recommendation from the folks that are our local experts in terms of what they do, and realize that the people in our police department, in our fire department, are called on by other towns for their opinion, their expertise on how to approach this, as well as other public safety issues. So I think we're blessed in terms of having the people that man our public safety emergency services, as we've seen both during storms, but now we're seeing it from a security standpoint. I've got tremendous confidence in our team in terms of both what their recommendations are, how they'll implement it, and importantly, that if something needs to be done differently or adjustments, they'll come back and say, look, we need help, we need to make these adjustments because of what we've learned. Again, I've got tremendous respect for their recommendations and helping us keep people safe, but move forward with our daily lives. All right, any further comments on this or any other item in the budget?
If I may,
Go ahead.
the health department, I was surprised to see these on this list, and don't recall a lot of discussion about that. I have to give credit to Mr. Cleary. Is he still there? He is.
He's back.
As he always comes in with such almost flat to flat budgets, and I know that this was an anomaly. I wanted to ask, if I may, if you're willing to come forward, what the effect will be if these positions are cut from the budget. What will that mean for current staffing and ability to provide service?
And while Mr. Cleary is coming up, and Sands, thank you for joining us here, just want to point out that they got added to this list, not because there was substantive discussion about reducing it, but if it was brought up, why do we need them, what's taking place, what would happen if we didn't, they got added to this list for future discussion purposes. So I don't mean to suggest that there was a motion or move made to eliminate these.
Thank you.
However, Mr. Cleary?
If you could ask your question again, just so I'm clear
So-
on the response that I...
My question is, if we do eliminate these positions, how does that impact the current staff who are in place and the students in terms of the service level? And if you could just speak to that,
Sure.
what happens if we eliminate them?
Sure. Essentially, we would continue functioning as we are today. And we brought this request, and I'm not going to reiterate the 4 reasons we stated before, but essentially we would continue as today. We view our role in public health as in other public safety entities to reduce the risk of things from happening. And so here we think, especially the point where we are currently under the industry standard for the staffing level for our school health offices. We're currently at about 75% of where we should be for the middle school and high school levels. And that, as any lawyer will point out to you, is an opening for liability. If something was to go wrong, that is what they look at first. How are you doing in terms of comparing to the industry standard? And what we're looking to do is reduce that risk, not entirely, not fully. We're not asking to go up to 100% funding in that area, but to cut that risk in half. Essentially, that's what these 3 part-time positions would enable us to do. We're feeling pressures in every way at this level in particularly, is that the need for nurses to participate in the team meetings that go on in the schools is critical. That they need to be a part of that collaborative discussion that provides a full assessment of any individual child's current condition prior to the child being treated, prior to the child being dismissed from school. The nurse needs to be a part of that team in collaboration with the guidance and other folks in the schools to be aware of what's going on with any particular child. And that's where we feel that some of this risk has increased, is that, as you know, at the high school level, there's children in various states at any given time, and being a part of that collaborative discussion to say this child may be somewhat in crisis today, may be at higher risk today, is critical for the nurse to be there and be a part of that team. And currently, the way we're staffed right now, it's reducing the ability of those nurses to leave those nursing offices and be a part of those team meetings. This is why we're bringing it here. We would continue to function as best we can with the pressures that we have currently. We bring it here because we feel it's at a point where we need to at least ask to address it.
Well, a follow-up question in terms of policy, and I know that right now at the Board of Education level and in some of our schools, for example, I'll just pick on a hot topic, some of our food policies. How often do the nurses end up participating in some of those conversations with
Well, and that's
with
part of
creation
the
of
pressures
policy?
driving this, is that as we mentioned, there's been some changes in the regulations that enable more students to qualify for 504 plans. And the nurse is part of that process that's one of the team meetings that they participate in to try and reduce the risks related to that. And so every one of those children that has that plan, that there's usually some pre-planning, there's a team meeting, there's a PPT or a 504, there's the post-training and education, the changes to the care plan, trainings of teachers, for field trips, all those types of things that go on after a child has had a plan developed that go on.
If I might, just to clarify, when you talk about changes in regulations that's requiring additional meetings, those are changes that are effectively mandated by the state.
That's correct.
So those aren't changes that our Board of Ed or the town has made.
Policy, it's pressures on the entire school system in relation to some of these regulatory changes.
Okay. So we're in essence reacting to those mandates of service levels that we need to provide.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you, sorry.
No, thank you. Thank you for the clarification.
Sure.
Thanks, Sands. Any further comments or questions or comments?
Yes.
Go ahead.
The electricity adjustments, so the power purchase negotiations, do we anticipate any, obviously, we would have it here, but where did the other negotiations stand? Or I know there were a few different, is it all part of one negotiation, or there were a few different entities that we were talking with here at the Board of Selectmen level when we approved?
Yes, to look at that, these are some of the discussions that came out of Mr. Bowman, Mr. Michelangelo, and looking at what we do in one case with recyclables, in other cases with our trash. And there's the opportunity to both to have somebody take that away from our centers here, but also to use that to create electricity, and we could then buy that back. We were trying to wrap that all into a package that would allow us to get more money in terms of what they're paying us for that, or what it's costing us for that, and then to have the benefit of lower power rates. They had done a great job in their negotiations, and they're working through and being creative enough to look at this as a way for a win-win on both sides. However, there were some management changes with the organization that we were talking about. Some different people got involved. And so the option, as much as the trash or recyclables piece was still there, the electricity component kind of changed and wasn't a good economic benefit, so we went back to using the pricing we used throughout the first half of the year.
Okay, thank you for that. That helps.
That's helpful, thank you. Next, I've got one more.
Go
It's
ahead.
the Senior Center Director, if we could talk about that. There was a lot of discussion about this at our joint session, and I think it was a good, healthy discussion that we had. You know, pros and cons, needs, and what can we do this year, what can we do next year, things like that. And, you know, without speaking for 12 people, I did not get the sense, you know, even though it might be my personal pleasure to have a full-time director there, whether they're hired on day one or halfway through the year, I didn't get a lot of sense from that meeting that there was a lot of appetite to do that, to be honest with you. And that's what is, you know, in this sheet here. So I was just wanted to know if we could kind of talk out loud about, is there something that we can agree on? Is there something that gets the job done, that puts the resource in place, that helps the senior center move forward to assist their population and to keep their programs moving forward at the proper rate and pace that we can come to terms with?
I think, you know, very definitely, from my standpoint, I'm looking at this budget and looking at adjustment to address the senior center director, and would certainly consider a part-time position there for the full year. So rather than getting some help in the second half, what can we do to find the dollars, find a way to get some full year help in there that could be planned on, somebody can get up to speed and actually have an impact during that year.
Yeah, I certainly appreciate that, because there was a great discussion about potentially this person helping achieve some new grant writing, or help to acquire some new grants and contributing toward that effort as well. So maybe there is some additional, you know, revenue upside by putting a person in there to kind of work on some of these things. And it just seems like something that that certainly I support, but, you know, it's not just me. There's 3 of us, there's 9 of the Board of Finance. I'm just trying to find if there's something that we can agree upon that's, like Mr. Tetra just mentioned, that we could put in place that would, you know, be more acceptable to the subsequent boards and bodies who have to look at it, so it's not at risk.
Yeah, right, and I would like to see something that will succeed its way, then
Right.
make its way through the whole
Right.
process. I
Right.
agree with you completely, Selectman Kiley. I know, and I think that's one of the powerful statements that I heard both at our hearing as well as Saturday and through emails. There is a need, and, you know, we had discussion at the table in the Museum and History Center last year about this item.
We
And we had a
did,
new
right.
director who has now been in place for a year, and I think I would really love to be able to provide at least that part-time position as well, and would support that throughout the bodies also.
Right.
I think, what it does is, there were some questions at the Board of Finance table raised about the different roles. I very much appreciate that opportunity to look at the grants as well.
Yeah.
Though I would caution, as I think others did at that table that night, that wouldn't want us to rely on that. In other words, I think
Yeah.
as a town that we need to support this position. If that is a potential upside, I would also rejoice in that and be grateful for that. But I
Right.
think that this also allows that person to provide the services. In
Right.
addition, and this is critical to me, it gives the director a chance to give more of an overview and look at the full range of what human services
Right.
is, which is our social services. And, much as Mr. Cleary has talked about with the needs increasing for the nursing, we're seeing the same, and we know at the senior center, which certainly the folks on the Human Services Commission and the top 10 group have documented well. So I am in full support of
Doing something.
at least doing the part-time position for the
Okay.
full year. And again, I agree with you, just having, informally talked with different members of the other bodies, I think that that's something that would be much more likely to be successful to make its way through. And in addition, I know that Terry Giegengak, who is our very capable director, is going to move forward with a strategic planning process with those folks there, and I think that this is
A step in
a good
that
one.
direction.
Yeah.
Well, good.
I
Well,
would-
go, I'm sorry.
I know, I just add that one of the, I think, key components in terms of getting support for this going through,
Right.
because one of the pieces that was brought up during that meeting that seems to be missing would be a job description and kind of the specific role.
Yeah.
And not necessarily that as much as the detailed job description that you might need as we're going out to hire this person, because we'll need it at that point, assuming
Right.
this goes through, but some specifics in terms of
Right.
goals and objectives.
Right.
What would be different? This person comes on, where do they help with? There's certainly much that needs doing, and certainly looking in the years ahead, a lot that can be done in terms of helping our seniors. The question is, what do you do first? Where does this person focus their efforts? What do they help us accomplish and change? So,
Well,
sorry.
well, certainly I agree with everything that both of you just said without repeating it. And just to emphasize one point, I mean, I feel strongly that the position is needed, and if there were to be some fund grant revenue, it would be incremental to that, but it wouldn't be contingent upon this position. Or this position wouldn't be contingent upon that
Yeah,
effort. Okay.
yeah, agreed.
Thank you for that discussion.
All right. Any further discussion on that, or any other items in the budget?
I think I'm good on this list.
All right. Anything off the list?
Could we just level set the Board of Ed side? I mean, where we are, I mean, as far as, I don't have the number in front of me at this moment. I mean, we have a proposed reduction, it's 8.0 something. Can you just walk us through where we are with the Board of Ed from the proposal that came from the Board of Education to the proposed recommendations by the first selectmen? And just kind of, I just want to get a starting point for where we are.
Simply put, Linda, let me take a shot at that, and then please add in any of the details. Because I believe in 800 and...
804?
804.
804, was that the number? Okay.
Approximately 400,000 of that was a reduction based on cost reductions, a reduction in the cost of pension program,
Right,
based on updated estimates from our actuary,
right.
and a reduction in the cost of electricity. So
Right.
$200,000 based on the reduction in the pension program, $200,000 based on cost reductions. The other $400,000 was my request to the Board of Ed to go back and look for other cost savings within that budget to help us out in maintaining the tax rate.
Okay. And that takes us to the number that we have today, which is, do you have the number in front of you?
Tax rate increase is 2.67.
No, just, I'm talking about the Board of Education budget number, yeah.
Board of Education budget
I just
is,
want to put the number on the record, that's all I'm trying to do.
the increase is 3.32%.
On the Board of Ed side.
And I'm looking for the dollars.
actual number,
The dollars.
151.
The increase is 5,026,305.
Well,
The-
excuse me, Linda, if you could,
That's just Board of
Linda, if you could get up to the mic and say that, that would be helpful.
Yeah. I'm just trying to put the post-first selectman proposed dollar figure on the record. That's what I'm trying to do.
Combined town and Board of Ed, the
First Selectman's recommendation is an increase of $8,250,024. That's a total of a 2.96% budget increase.
What's the increase to the Board of Ed budget?
The Board of Ed is $5,026,305, which is a 3.32% increase.
Does that answer
Board
your
of Ed
question?
year
No,
over
it
year.
does not. I'm looking for what the Board of Education dollar figure
What's-
is
what's
as
the total
of this
budget for the-
moment.
Board of Ed?
Gotcha.
Yep.
Understood. 156,218,051.
I can't write that fast.
Okay,
I'm sorry.
I'll speak slower.
That's your fun. I'm just kidding.
This is impressive, because you're not a natural left-hander.
No, I
right?
am not.
I just,
Right. And that number is inclusive of all Board of Education change and and First Selectman recommendations.
Yes.
That is the number that's before us.
Yes.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you very much.
yeah,
That was my
just to,
question.
just to
Yeah,
track
I just
that.
wanted to put the number out there.
The superintendent made a budget request.
Yep,
That was increased by just over $100,000 by the Board of Ed.
the 112.
And
Yep,
that
yep,
was,
yep.
and so that's the number that comes to the First Selectman.
Mhm.
That's the number that I adjusted, referring it on to the Board of Selectmen,
Beautiful.
which is the next step in the process.
Good. Thank you. Appreciate that.
And just to further that conversation, and thank you, I was with you on
Okay.
that, getting that number on the table. So, also, there's been some communication, and I just want to say, for my part, and I'm not going to speak, I'll let you two speak directly since you're here, but there is no $4 million cut that I am planning to put on the table, or that's on this table right now. That was not on this list here. Certainly, the other boards, as, you know, we go through the conversation, as is always the case.
Maybe the simpler way to say that is I don't believe that anything of that magnitude was discussed or mentioned during the joint hearings, at least to my knowledge or memory, of the Board of Selectmen and Board of Finance, and unless you guys heard something else that I didn't.
Did not.
No.
Did not.
So, moving on to just kind of going back to the internal service fund conversation, and could we talk a little bit about that today too? Because I think that, you know, we went through all the lists from the budget on this sheet, and those weren't on there, but again, could you kind of give us a sense, or maybe Mr. Mayor, just in terms of the healthcare experience and where things stand and where things look from that perspective?
Bob, if you could do
today.
that in terms of, as you have done, simply describe where we plan to be at the end of this year, and then what's the projection for the fiscal 15 budget, and where we would, if nothing changes, where we would be at the end of fiscal 15. Is that fair?
Yes,
Yeah,
that's
that's-
wonderful.
Hi. As of the February experience on the town side, the easier one, experience has improved. When you fully factor in the February experience with a potential adjustment for your stop-loss insurance, there's a savings from the original budget, the budget that's in your purple book, of about $350,000. Okay? So which means that,
Could you just, this says 250,000
What did I
on our
just say?
sheet.
Three.
You said 350.
I meant 250.
We'll take three.
apologize.
I know. it's-
Going once, going
it's
twice.
bad. Shucks.
Okay, $250,000.
Okay.
That was one of our good news adjustments on page 1. It's the
Yes.
second item under expenditure decreases.
On the Board of Ed's side, there's two factors that went into the February updated experience. First factor was the new experience, which improved a little bit. Second factor was the Board of Ed had been using, or the consultants had been using a 7.5% trend factor in the Board of Ed experience based upon their beliefs that there was still this 2 times IBNR there. That 2 times IBNR does not exist anymore, so the second item, the second factor, the second variable that went into the updated Board of Ed February analysis was increasing the trend factor from the 7.5% to 8.6%. Combination of those compared to the original budget book, I think I get the January, the October numbers, the December numbers, the November numbers, all a little bit confused in my head. You have about a $1.4 million degradation in experience from the budget book. You also have, because the updated experience to January, using the February numbers, there is degradation of the experience for this current fiscal year, which means that the year-end reserve, June 30, 2014, number will be less than it was anticipated to be when the Board of Ed budget book was developed. So you have a combination of those two items when you carry forward into the fiscal year 15 budget. As a result of those two items, roughly speaking, the information today is at the end of this fiscal year, the Board of Ed will have approximately a one-time IBNR reserve, i.e. a proper, reasonable reserve at June 30, 2014. However, carrying that experience and the new fund balance into 15, combined with what is budgeted for 15, would eliminate 100% of that reserve plus about $100,000. So without any change to the budget book, at the end of June 30, 15, the reserve balance at the Board of Ed would be approximately a negative $100,000. Is that clear?
It is.
Yes. Just to
I'm
clarify
proud.
also, on the town side, we had been using a 9-point-something trend rate. Are we now using the new trend rate?
Yeah, the national trend rate over the last couple of years has been about 9.5. About a month ago, well, I won't say 99, but the vast majority of your major carriers have reduced their trend rate down to 8.6%.
8.6.
And the town and the Board of Ed are both now on the 8.6% track.
So for those folks that were wondering, how did the Board of Ed and town get out of sync and in essence have different trends? One part of that's experience, but one part of that was budgeting at a different trend line. Now both the town and Board of Ed are budgeting at the same trend line as recommended by Aon.
Correct statement.
Okay.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yes, the previous trends were also recommended by Ann, given what
Not
they
quite
did.
true. The town consistently used the recommended trend that Aon requested. The Board of Ed, because they were for several years experiencing favorable experience, initiated discussions with Aon and came to an agreement with Aon that Aon would use a lower trend as long as the Board of Ed maintained a 2 times IBNR.
And I may be opening a can of worms that we don't need to open today, but bottom line, right now, in terms of the budget, which is what we have on the table, it's at the end of fiscal 15, we're going to have a negative $100,000 balance in that reserve, for that part of the reserve.
Right, there'd be, basically, when I say negative fund balance, in other words, the required accrual would be approximately $1.6 million, to use a round number, 1.55, $1.6 million. They would have a deficit of $100,000, which means they'd have no reserve at all, plus a deficit of $100,000. Because the fund balance is different than your
Right.
accrual number.
And if I can take that, and there are several things. One, to the benefit of the town, the rating agencies really look at the internal service fund as a whole, and if not, kind of expand it beyond that to looking at the town balance sheet as a whole. But just from a standpoint of the internal service fund, that includes both workers' comp, general liability, as well as the town healthcare, as well as the Board of Ed healthcare. So those are looked at collectively. And from our question, and there are really kind of three issues we're evaluating, at the very least. One is, do we do anything about this? And can make an argument as to whether that's necessary or not, or how soon. Second, if we do something about it, is it something that we look to try and make up all in 1 year? Or third, do we do something about it and potentially spread that solution out over a number of years and allowing the fund to be balanced? If you look back in our history, the medical insurance fund on just the town side was negative for a number of years as we kind of worked that back into a positive situation, and now the town is in a positive situation and has reserves that exceed what its IBNR is. But that was not always the case. The Board of Ed has gone from having reserves that exceeded its IBNR to be below that for a bit. But the rating agencies or other folks who looked at that never said, the town is negative, you have to fix that right away. They do look to us to have a plan for addressing that. And I think that becomes what's required of the town, is to make sure that we don't ignore it, but in fact we take a look at, here's what we're doing, step 1, 2, 3 to get that addressed.
And to clarify, because I did use cash balances, fund balances, and accrual balances, so just thinking a way to state that very clearly, the reserve requirement at 1 times IBNR would be about 1.6 required. Therefore, the cash on hand, because they're cash basis, would have to be $1.6 million equal. The cash projected would be a negative, would be a negative $100,000. So that's the negative $100,000.
And also, just to, again, looking at the big picture of the entire internal service fund, I think when I took office, it was about a negative $7 million. That has progressively come down. I think we're going to finish this year
2.5.
at negative 2.5. And I'm saying negative because the general liability or workers' comp number is about a negative $5 or $6 million, which balances out the other two. So for the first time in recent memory, one of the other two funds is getting into a negative position or drawing down below its IBNR. But you could look at the whole fund and say workers' comp and liability is one of the drivers in terms of why it's negative. That's one of the reasons, if you remember back 2 years ago, we put an extra $2 million into the internal service fund specifically to address the balance in the workers' comp and
That's
general
right.
liability issue. The workers' comp expense within the budget has turned the corner and is starting to come down, so that's been helping that, if you will, silo within the internal service fund. The town has experienced both some positive results and has changed the assumptions and is fully funding per the consultant's recommendations for the last few years, so that has helped. And the Board of Ed has experienced some negative experience or less than anticipated experience, as well as some different changes in the assumptions. So we're trying to get back to realistic assumptions, but never has it been suggested by any of the rating agencies or anybody else that we address the workers' comp negative accrual by the end of the fiscal year. When the town was in a negative position, it wasn't suggested that the town address that by the end of any fiscal year. And having met several times with the rating agencies at this point, they seem to be comfortable with the overall state of the town. They certainly will want to know that we have recognized this as an issue and have a plan in place to help adjust that. But I don't want to have anybody get the feeling that we have to adjust that by the end of the fiscal year. We can choose to, but it is certainly not something that is required by the rating agencies from that standpoint. So,
And using internal service fund as a way to talk about the IBNR and the healthcare side, as Mr. Tetral pointed out, internal service fund has improved from a negative $7 million to a negative $2.5 million without a supplement to the budget, either directly to the medical IBNR or to the internal service fund somewhere else, that negative 2.5 million will then deteriorate to about a negative 4.1 million.
The 1.6.
And again, just to clarify, that's not the direction we want to move in. That's not the number we want to be at. But the only kind of silver line is we've been in worse shape than that. And we will be, looking to address part of this. And I think part of the discussion with this board tomorrow will be what specific steps would we like to see taken as part of that, and what would our recommendation be?
Right. And, just a clarifying question in terms of we, there's that proverbial we. So in terms of when we say we can adjust that, there are actions that can be taken by the town or by the Board of Education. And maybe it would be helpful to just have a sense of, what some of the potential actions are on either side.
Well, the rating agencies don't really care how the town's internal accounts are aligned. In other words, if there's surplus in one account and negative in another account, that is not an issue to them. They look at the internal service fund as a whole. So with respect to the rating agencies, this issue could be adjusted, handled, taken care of by increasing the workers' comp. You don't have to touch directly the medical reserve if you chose not to. So that's one way, is just to add supplemental funding, thank you, to the internal service fund. Another way is to add additional funding to the Board of Ed budget with the directive that that additional funding be utilized to be put into the reserve and not to be used for operations. Those are the two most straightforward and cleanest methods.
And in your second example, that would be an agreement, but essentially the board would need to vote in favor and in support of that action.
Yeah, the town has no control over that, but I'm sure the Board of Ed would be cooperative.
I mean, the pragmatic side is, we're going to make a decision tomorrow, so any recommendations we want to make, we get to make within the next 24 hours. The Board of Ed isn't planning to meet at midnight tonight, nor at any time much before May, as I understand it. Next week?
Well,
Okay. But traditionally,
to
they haven't voted on interim budget recommendations until they see a final budget passed by the RTM. Is that a fair?
correct.
Okay.
Okay.
So expecting them to both understand our recommendation and take action on it before the RTM has a chance, and the Board of Finance has a chance to pass on both those, might be difficult from just a pure pragmatic standpoint in terms of what takes place. That doesn't mean we couldn't or shouldn't make a recommendation tomorrow. And at the very least, keep this conversation going through the board so there is, it's fully involved. But I think that's really our charge, is we have to pass this budget on to the Board of Finance and the rest of the town. What recommendations do we want to make to both guide that discussion, but also suggest where we think the budget ought to be? Is that,
I think that's fair. Just a couple points in summary for me, and thank you for your explanations, Mr. Mayor and Mr. Tetra. I appreciate them. Yeah, the bad news is, on the Board of Ed side, we have this silo, that's the problem, on the medical side. The additional bad news that doesn't come into play or come to light is, personally, from running a business and having healthcare run through my office, it's actually unusual to only be required to have 1 month of IBNR. On the private side, the least you can get away with is 2, and most people will recommend that you had 3 months of run out, just so that you're in a safe position at any point during a year or at the end of any given year. So one is on the low side to begin with, and the one that we do have is going to be deteriorated by the time we get to this table next year, give or take $100,000, right? So that's the bad news on that. But the good news is we do get to look at the whole fund, right, as a whole, and the fund itself is moving in a positive direction up until now. So we have some options there that don't appear to be too damaging, at least in the short term. However, should this trend continue, we could have even a bigger problem next year, right? If trends continue in the downward spiral and the numbers that we're looking at now don't come in, we might have a discussion next year with even a larger number for the end of that current year and looking forward into 15, 16. So we need to be very careful. I think my initial thoughts are, based on what I've learned, is that having a solution that we can implement over time, short term, whether it's 2 years or so, that addresses the big picture, makes a lot of sense without putting a large amount of money into the budget to fix it today, dollar for dollar, because we don't have to do that, and we aren't at risk if we don't do that. And in conjunction with a plan that's considerate of all the points and all the figures that we need to get to in a year or 2 years down the road. I think that the combination of some type of funding mechanism over a year or two with a plan that's put in place and approved starts to make sense. I don't know exactly what that is this moment. I have some thoughts, and we could talk about that more tomorrow. But it kind of seems like we're going in that direction.
Two comments on your comments, Mr. Kelly. One, the technical definition of IBNR is the dollars required to pay all claims that have occurred prior to the cutoff date, and different entities have different payment periods and payment patterns. So that's a different number for people.
Fair enough.
But with respect to your other comment about the Internal Service Fund in general,
Yeah.
as long as the town, not as long as, back up, if the town were only to budget what the projections were, then the Internal Service Fund $2.5 million balance, negative balance,
Right.
would stay at a negative $2.5 million.
Right.
So to actually get that balance to zero, where you want it to be, where you're fully, then it requires some supplemental funding
Yeah,
as opposed to just funding to the budget.
I'm with you. Thank you. No, I think that's good. That's a good discussion. Thank you.
Any final comments here?
Not on this.
Do we need any more discussion this afternoon? We've got certainly a lot to think about between now and 2 o'clock tomorrow.
Get my.
Just one other.
So we can.
Can we go back for a minute to Fair TV, actually?
Well, I was just looking at that. Can Don touch on that tomorrow, or is that not really in his area?
He can. What,
That was
any
the last
thoughts on
item.
the type of questions
Yeah.
you'd like? And 2 o'clock in the afternoon, it might be a little tough to get a member of the Fair TV Commission here.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
certainly we can ask
Jerry's-
Don for his.
Oh,
Mr.
there's
Skino's raising
Oliver.
his hand.
And,
Okay.
yeah, Jerry is not part of the Fair TV Commission per se, just to
Right.
clarify.
Yeah.
He is on the CIC, the Cable Advisory Commission.
Okay. So that might be perfectly fine. Okay.
But it may be something, what you raised earlier, and I said, I was kind of listening and going through, but just in
Right.
terms of, are there any other creative options? And I'm not aware of any, but, would assume that the Cable Advisory Council folks or the Fair TV folks would have brought forward those ideas, but if there's,
I just
just to
don't know.
confirm and clarify, maybe with them, maybe we could even just.
The communication from CIC dealt with, we have a lawsuit, we need, in essence, a legal defense fund.
Mhm.
We've got authority from PURA to reserve all this money for that legal defense fund. So that's what they're proceeding to do.
That's what that's their position. Okay.
Beyond that, they really didn't offer us any alternatives or options or suggest any other ways to assist us in continuing to run Fair TV in our town.
Okay. All right.
Okay, all right,
All
thank
right.
you.
And I think, to
That
be
helps.
fair, the Fair TV Commission is reacting kind of to some degree the same way this board is.
Right.
Because they found out about it in roughly the same time period that we did.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure they'd heard rumblings about it before, but the definitive letter didn't come down until we'd already started our budget deliberations.
Okay. All right. So in the end, they have a hole of about 25 grand that we need to find a way to correct so that we can continue operations.
And if you think back to the letter that we received, and you both have gotten copies, and we can share that again if need be.
Mm-hmm.
I believe they carved out, of the 100 grand, they carved out about 25 grand to start, roughly 25% of that money.
Right.
And then said the PURA will continue to authorize additional funds for legal defense in 10 grand increments.
Right.
So right now it's 25 grand, or if, since the whole fund's 100 grand, let me use 25% has been carved off.
Okay.
But CAC has said, we're not going to forward any money or hand out any grants this year until we know the legal situation has been resolved and how much money we have needed. So they're not really holding out a lifeline to us in that regard.
Okay.
So to sum up what you're saying, and this is the...
Is that the doc?
Yeah, if you
Okay.
want to take a look at this.
Okay.
I guess there is a slight possibility, but it's highly unlikely. And we certainly can't hold out hope for that money at all.
I think there are two milestones on that. One is the legal action is resolved, and there's some money left. And second, we hear about that in a timely enough basis that we could actually do something differently. So that the challenge is with the funding that the town currently provides, Fair TV can operate at its current level for about 6 months.
Okay.
Fair TV hasn't come back and said, we can reduce levels, we can do this, and stretch the money out. So in pure math, if you have roughly a $50,000 budget, you have half that money, that's 6 months' worth of funding.
Got it.
What we're contemplating is filling that out, so instead of half a year, they have a full year's worth of funding from the town based on what happens, and potentially we can reduce that or not spend it if things get resolved and money's made available. But if nothing happens, if we increase this by 25 grand, then Fair TV can run for the next year.
Okay. Thank you for that.
Thanks.
Appreciate that.
All right, any other comments, questions, or resources we may need for tomorrow? That being said, I want to thank you both. I think this is the healthiest conversation we've had before the budget process, before we got into it. I want to thank you both for your thought process, taking time to look at this, and frankly being willing to discuss it this far ahead of the budget process. And I think that gives not only our board, but I'd say the residents, department heads, and everybody else involved and touched by this budget more insight as to what's going on and what may happen tomorrow.
Good.
Right? So with that,
Appreciate it.
I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
A second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you all. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you.